that was the master solenoid. He shouldn't be turning that on. What's going on, YouTube? It is your favorite AMPIA back again, this time with some stories about times that my coworkers almost killed me at the airport. But before I get into that, I wanted to remind you that my 1,000 subscriber giveaway, that is a $100 gift card to Aircraft Spruce, is still going to be live for one more week. That closes Wednesday, August 2nd, 2023. So make sure you head over to that video and leave a comment if you want to get entered for a chance to win that. So I was working at a flight school for many years before I became an instructor at a Part 147 school, which was obviously great for experience. And flight schools are interesting in how they work. And just a flight school by itself isn't so bad because you've got, flight school airplanes moving around that you have to maintain and service and whatnot. But in my particular case, we were also an FBO, so we were also working on owners aircraft. So I remember we were working on a Cessna 172, and we were doing a 100-hour inspection on it. And this is one of those situations where the aircraft wasn't scheduled for the weekend, and then it flew a whole bunch of hours Thursday and Friday. So like Friday afternoon, we had to do a 100-hour inspection on it real quick before it flew Saturday and Sunday. And what I mean by real quick was it was like 2 in the afternoon, and the owner said, hey, we need a 100-hour inspection on this because it's going to be flying all weekend and it's going to expire. So we would stay sometimes till 10, 11 o'clock at night to do this 100-hour inspection, 2 or 3 of us, and get it done. And I was training an employee at the time. He was somewhat green, somewhat new. And he was a great guy. Like, he wasn't late to work or anything like that, but wasn't the most skilled of mechanics. And we'd been working together for about 5 or 6 months at this point. And I remember doing a 100-hour inspection on the aircraft, and we had pulled it in, we had run it, I had pulled all the spark plugs out of it, and I was basically working firewall for it. I was doing the engine and all of the engine stuff. And I told him, like, you do the airframe. And he was the one that was going to be signing off the inspection, and I was kind of training him as we go along. So I was having him look at things, and then obviously if I found something, I was showing him what I found and how to find those things and whatnot. But I remember we had done the oil change, we had done the compression checks, and I said, okay, oil change is done, compression checks are done, I'm gonna go ahead and put a new oil filter on it and a new air filter on it. So I grab the air filter and I go walking over to the airplane, and I grab my little rolly chair. I set my rolly chair down and I roll up underneath the nose of a 172. And on a 172, the air filter is right underneath the propeller. So the propeller's up here, and you have the engine, and your air filter sits basically right below that. So I'm underneath here and I'm taking the screws out, and I had just pulled the air filter element out. And I remember hearing the master solenoid go clunk on the firewall. And I thought, and this all happens really fast, I think, that was the master solenoid. He shouldn't be turning that on. And just out of instinct, I pushed myself away from the aircraft as quick as I could, and no sooner did I clear the prop with the plugs out, he hit the starter button, and the propeller spun around right where I was sitting. And at the time, the propeller was like this. So if I had been there, it would have come all the way around. It wasn't like it was sitting next to me and would have just bumped me. Like, it would have hurt. It would have hurt a lot. And I remember at the time, I maintained my composure pretty well, but I was really angry about it. And I was like, what are you doing? And he goes, well, I was going to check the mags. And I'm like, my guy, you don't have to turn the master switch on to check the mags. You just turn the key on. And I guess he thought, for whatever reason, that he had to turn the master switch on and turn the key on to check the magnetos. And what I heard was him flipping on the master switch. And as I was pushing away, I heard the clicks of the key right before he went to start. So that was really terrifying. He unfortunately didn't work for us very long, and I still stay in touch with him. He doesn't work in aviation anymore, which might be a good thing. Another time, we were working on a Cessna 210, and this was a 210 that had an STC on it for like a 310 or 315 horsepower engine or something like that. And the turbo on the side of this thing is huge, and this all matters to the story. The turbo on the side of this thing is like a 70 millimeter turbo. It's just massive because it has to feed a 520 cubic inch engine, which is obviously a huge engine. And we had just taken I think it was the fuel pump, it might have been the fuel flow divider off and sent it out for overhaul. We just put it back on, so we had to do a continental fuel pressure adjustment. And I was working with a different mechanic at the time. He was actually a retired F-16 mechanic, who's awesome mechanic, love the guy to death. His name's Heath. And I told him, I said, okay, here's what we got to do. We got to put this pressure gauge on the flow divider, and we got to put another pressure gauge on the output of the pump. We're then going to start the engine and run it at idle. I have to observe the pressures at idle, make an adjustment, then we'll go up to full power and I'll make an adjustment at full power. Of course, not making the adjustment while the engine's at full power. I was going to have him go up to full power, read the gauge, pull it back, make the adjustment, and do it again. And anyways, we're out on the ramp. We had pulled the airplane out of the hangar, and we're out on the ramp. He gets in, he gets on the brakes, and we've got it chalked. Both main wheels are chalked. And we're doing the idle. I make my adjustments. Everything's going pretty well with the idle check. So I said, all right. And I just go like this. I said, go ahead and go to full power. And he goes to full power, and I sort of step back out of the way of the propeller and whatnot, because I don't want to be too close to it when the engine's running, full bore. That would be a bad idea. And I'm watching the fuel pressures come up. I'm not really paying attention to what's happening. And with that giant turbo, it'll hit maximum RPM. It'll go to 2,700 RPM, but then as the turbo starts pushing a bunch of boost into the engine, it'll really start to take off. And I've been in the airplane before where even though you've got your feet on the brakes, it'll just drag it along the ramp. Wheels locked. This has so much power, it will drag the aircraft across the ramp, which is why we had it chalked. And I know he had his feet on the brakes because he's a competent pilot and he's also a competent mechanic. And I remember I was like, why is my fuel gauge moving? And I kind of looked up just in time to realize that the co-pilot side tire, or the right side tire, was climbing up over the top of the chalk. And the strut is right here, and the strut's about to knock me off of my feet. So I just sort of grabbed onto the strut and did a shimmy maneuver with the airplane as it jumped chocks at full power and boost out in front of the hangar. And I think what we ended up doing with that one, after that, we shut it off. We gathered our thoughts and our minds, because it was obviously a scary experience for the both of us. And we took it out to a parking tee, and this time we chalked the wheels, but this time we added a 15,000 pound ratchet strap to the tail, so that even if it did jump chocks, the tail would hold it and it couldn't get away, because I had to run it at full power to check what the fuel pressure was. And for the final experience, this one was entirely my own fault. I was ignoring safety regulations and whatnot, and I think I was changing a tail light. I want to say it was on a 310. It might have been a 340, but I was changing the beacon light up on the top of the tail. And the ladder was like one step too short. It was just one step too short. And I did what you're not supposed to do. I was like, screw it. I just gotta put this lens on real quick. It's a lens and a clamp, and that's all. So I remember I climbed up onto the handle of the step ladder, which my mom screams at me because I did that in one of my YouTube videos. Don't ever do that. It's a really bad idea. But I stepped up onto the handle of the step ladder, and when I did, I learned why that's such a bad idea, because the step ladder actually collapsed. And I didn't have anything to grab onto because I had the lens in one hand, or the glass in one hand, and I had my screwdriver in the other hand. And I remember I fell from the ladder just straight down onto my feet, but in the way of me and the ground was a toolbox, and my toolbox had an edge on it like this, and the front of my shin caught that edge and took the skin right off the front of my shin. And I remember since that day, it is not something I have ever done again. But I learned from my mistakes. I'm telling them to you now so that hopefully you don't make the same mistakes. When I do magneto checks and things like that, or compression checks, what I usually do is I take the keys out and I put them on the glare shield, so that I know when I'm working on the engine, I can look at the keys and know that the keys are not in the ignition. And I had done that with the first story. I had done that when we were doing the engine, but I was down there changing the air filters. I didn't see my coworker grab them and stick them in the ignition switch. But anyways, that's gonna do it for this video. Leave a comment below, subscribe, tell me about a story at your job, something that you've experienced working out there in aviation when somebody else almost got hurt, or when you got hurt. Maybe you took a bath in Skydroll, which we all know is a lot of fun. And I will see you all in the next one. Be easy.